Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athletic trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase them all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. For this episode, we are continuing our celebration of National Athletic Training Month with story time.
Rewarding story time. We are talking about our patient successes.
Yes, no better way to celebrate National Athletic Training Month than being able to share our success stories with everyone out there.
What was your favorite patient success?
I think the most memorable, at least off the top of my head, is when I had an athlete at the beginning of track season. He already, first race, he already qualified for nationals. So we were like, all right, sweet. The next week, he got hurt in our home meet. Hurt his hamstring, which anyone who's working track and field knows, for a sprinter, that's not a good sign. You know, that could jeopardize the season for sure. But, you know, we were very dedicated to his rehab. You know, he took the time that he needed because we weren't worried about him qualifying. We already knew he was going to be solid. So we took our time with him. We did a great rehab. He's been healthy ever since. Really just some hamstring stuff here and there, but really nothing too big. And he ended up running at conference that year.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
It's kind of like watching your kid.
Yeah, especially because you spend so much time with them. Because especially in this case, because we did really take our time with it, and you know he had a lot of time off, so we spent a lot of time together.
I remember there was this one girl. This is for probably one of my most rewarding, and the thing about this one I think that's really unique is that we didn't spend a lot of time together. I actually only spent maybe less than an hour with her. Her friend brought her into the athletic training clinic, and she was really, really nervous to come in because her shoulder was hurting, and she didn't want to tell anyone. So I was able to talk to her, figure out what was happening, and also figure out why she was so scared to come in. Apparently, she had had a really, really bad experience with one of the athletic trainers prior, and so that put a really bad taste in her mouth going back to the athletic training room, which, of course, the athletic training room should never be a place where people are scared to go.
No, it should be the safest of places.
Exactly. So I think when she told me after I worked with her and I was able to provide some of that treatment and give her some exercises to maintain what we had done that day, and I just got her out of pain for that day, and I remember that she was so thankful.
Safe to say you worked your magic?
I gotta say, she told me afterward that she was never going to come back, and she's really glad that I was there when she did, and that just made me realize that I need to continue doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just shows the impact athletic trainers have, bad
good
and good.
And bad, yeah.
We're always on, so on those, it's hard to think about on those really stressful days or those really frustrating days where maybe you snap at a kid a little too much that, they don't know what's going on with our day. That could be their first experience with us. And, if we just snap at them or really take out our frustration on them, it could leave a bad taste in their mouth. So it really shows you that we shouldn't be taking out frustration on patients, even though sometimes there's some kids who do some things that are like, what are you doing?
Yeah, definitely easier said than done.
Definitely.
So I asked this question on our Instagram stories last week, and Elizabeth B said that her first major rehab success was right after grad school. I was about a month into my first full-time job as an ATC working at a small NAIA school in Montana.
Yeah, I know that life. I'm living it.
A men's soccer player was racing back to the goal after being beat on an attack. He inverted his ankle so hard that it ripped open his skin, making it appear that he had a possible open tib-fib fracture.
Wow. That's pretty fascinating to think that.
Yeah, that's a major inversion.
Yeah, definitely. That really stretched the skin there, apparently.
Seriously. I stopped the bleeding, immobilized him, and shipped him off to the ER about 2 minutes down the road. He ended up blowing out his entire lateral capsule.
Oh my goodness.
That is not easy to do. He was 2 games into the season. Man, that sucks. Surgeon didn't think he would return earlier than 9 months post-op. Especially for an ankle sprain, that's a really long time.
Not just an ankle sprain. Anytime you hear the capsule, just everything blow out, that sucks.
Oh, yeah. She said he was the hardest working athlete I have had the privilege of meeting to date. We worked 2 to 3 times a day. We had an infection due to an allergic reaction to the steri strips early on. Oh, I know that life.
Yep, seriously, man, this kid is just having a lot of obstacles.
Once that was taken care of, we put in the work. The team made it to nationals 3 months later. He got the all clear from the doctor a week before we left for Florida. Oh, that was pretty fast.
I know, that's really, I mean, shoot, what, man, really cut that time down.
Yeah, 2/3 of it.
Yeah, seriously.
He was able to play all 110 minutes overtime in the first round and scores the winning PK.
Of course, that's what makes it better.
I could not have been more proud of all of his efforts to get back out on the pitch. Wow.
Wow, that's a crazy story. That's pretty awesome, especially when your athlete that you worked on contributed in that way. And it just shows that this kind of gets overlooked, but we do have an impact on, the performance level of some of these athletes. If that athlete was on that timetable, and of course the athlete has to take credit for that as well, because he put in the work, he did all that time, and the athletic trainer, set it up for that. But if he wasn't out there, who knows what would have happened?
A lot of athletic trainers are former athletes or some sort of they're active in some way. And I think it's really cool that we make that transition into, we're proud of what we've done in this athlete, but also proud of someone else who's in that position that we might have been in before.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to my conversations with Bill. I remember when I was a student, he always talked about being the X factor. Athletic trainers have the chance to be an X factor in their team's performance, and us preventing injuries, us having successful outcomes and preventing re-injury, that can have a huge effect on team performance.
Yeah, honestly, we're involved in so many different things.
No, yeah, for sure. But speaking of X factor, Andy Paulin has a pretty good story about how the effect of an athletic training student can have on an athlete.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Hey, you gave me one about rewarding. I think the one that jumps out at me the most, it was that first year football won the national championship. I think it was like 2009. And we didn't have a gigantic student staff. I think it was like 6, which is fine. During the course of the year, we had this just terrific football player. He went to the NFL. He played like 6 years in the NFL. Huge guy. I think he was like a defensive end. I mean, just a specimen. Well, somewhere near the end of the year, he injures his shoulder. It wasn't severe. It was just something he needed to rehab and not bang up, and he'd be ready to go. Incredibly non-compliant. He wouldn't listen to me. I would speak to him. He didn't want to listen, so we would go talk to the head coach. He didn't want to listen to the head coach either. Talk to his position coach. He goes, I'll play when I feel like I'm going to play. And we're like, well, it doesn't really work that way in football. You play when you're supposed to play. But more importantly, you're not doing anything to get well. I understand the playing thing, but yeah, you do nothing, so you get nothing. And so I'm like this, and I look over at the student, and she's about, I don't even think she was 5 foot. I think she was under 5 foot. She's like this little tiny thing. And she had already been doing some of his rehab. I said, I'm at a loss. I said, do you think you could get this guy back in? And I'm not quite sure what she said to him, but whatever it was, it worked. He was in there every day, twice a day. As long as she was doing the rehab, she got him back. He played in the championship game. We won the game. Guy goes on to the NFL. And every time I see her, I go, you're the one that put him in the NFL. I said, if he hadn't come in and done all that, I don't think the future would have been the way it is now. So that was just incredibly rewarding of how an athletic training student can make this guy click, and not only click, but he goes on to enjoy even more success.
Okay, I know we want to talk about the story for a second, but before we do that, I just want to say, it's really rewarding is having Andy on the show.
Yes, I still can't get over that we were able to do that. That was pretty awesome. It was fun talking to him.
He's just the best.
But I still want to know what that student said, or what happened to make someone who is like totally not compliant all of a sudden compliant.
Yeah, I need to take a course in whatever she said.
Yes, because that's pretty cool. And again, we're probably going to say this a lot in this episode, but it just goes to show you, like, some people just connect with different people.
Rapport is so important.
And that's what's unique about our job, is the rapport that we get to develop with our athletes.
Maddy actually talked about how she had an athlete who had bilateral hip surgeries within the same year.
Oh, no.
And she scored her first goal a couple of weeks ago. She plays defense.
Oh, that's even cooler.
And at the end of the game, she told me that goal was for me. That's what Maddy said.
That's always the best, is when you get to hear that.
Which I think, totally goes back to the point that you were making, and just that connection that we make, and all the work that they put in throughout the entire rehab, and before, during, after injury, and then now to have that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But how many times have we had an athlete say, hey, this one's for you, and then when they do it, they totally shank it or something like that? Like, thanks, man. It was the thought that counts, at least. I've had that happen before. I remember I've had an athlete tell me, hey, this jump's going to be for you. And they're going down the runway and they scratch. Or they foul, I should say. So they stepped over the line or like something. And I'm just like, so that's what you think of me, huh?
It's fate. It's karma.
Yep, it's probably definitely karma.
Actually, that reminds me, I had this one kid on my football team last year. And he got hurt after every single time he went out on special teams.
Ooh, special teams. That is the Wild West of football.
It got to the point that when special teams would go out and I knew this kid was going out, I would watch him because I knew. And we talked about maybe we should, not go out on special teams. Maybe you should avoid.
Maybe a different position would be better for you.
And of course, this kid, he had the lowest pain tolerance. This poor kid, my heart goes out to him. But our last game, he went out, of course, still on special teams because, nothing changes. And he went out. I watched the whole play. He made a tackle. No one got hurt. And I remember he ran off to the sideline towards me. And I just remember he was so excited. He's like, Sandra, I didn't get hurt.
That's the best, when the barometer of success right there is I didn't get hurt.
This kid was literally the most injury prone.
So, hey, that is a big improvement. We made it one play through special teams with no injury.
Yes, we did. So last week, our MVP Nicolette and Scott Tucker, if you remember him from our Expectations of Students episode, they have weekly Zooms that we've been going to for almost a year now.
Yes, and they have been fun to listen, and a lot of it's really building community with the local athletic trainers and athletic training students. So that's been really awesome.
So this last week they interviewed us and asked us, they asked us what our spirit animal was, which I thought was really funny, but they also asked us what our favorite episode was. And it took me a minute because we've done so many that for us were so rewarding.
Yes.
And just hearing experiences of athletic trainers is just really cool in general. But one of our favorites that we agreed on was the Thank an AT episode. In that episode, we talked about how athletes and admin and other people have thanked us as athletic trainers and just made us realize why we're doing what we're doing. And we just got another story that is perfect for this topic, and it reminded us of that episode.
Yes, this one's by Catie L. One of my clinic rotations as a senior, I got to develop and implement a long-term rehabilitation plan with one of our college football players who had a spondy. How intimidating is that? I would agree. That's kind of a big task, depending on the spondy too. That could definitely make a difference as well. About 5 years later, I got a random message from him. First off, I wanted to say thank you for everything you did for me when you were rehabbing my back. I'm still doing everything without pain most of the time, and when I do have a little pain, it's because I forget to stretch sometimes. I love it when they even know. Yeah, I've been slacking on my stretching. I need to get back on that. When I started working with you, I could barely put my socks on. LOL, so thank you again, and I'll always remember that. Sometimes I'll go back to that message and remember that what we do isn't just about the next practice or game, but can really make a long-term impact. Absolutely. And that anytime I'm thinking about return to play or rehab or anything like that, that is one of the things I'm thinking about is okay, yes, we need them to play in this game, or we need, think about this part of the season. But at some point, they're going to leave and not do sports like that anymore, and they're going to have kids, and they would probably agree with us when we say they would like to bend down and play with their children or something like that. So that is definitely something that comes to mind, and where it sometimes gets overlooked about the importance of your university athletic trainer, but that is exactly what we're there to do.
So something that stuck out to me in this story was talking about how he's still doing everything without pain. And I was actually talking to Gabby about this because Gabby was talking about how there was this girl. Actually, we'll read the story in a second, but basically what we were talking about is that some people have been living in pain and they don't realize until they're not in pain how much pain they were in.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Just because of how the body adapts, which is just crazy. So Gabby talks about her light bulb moment. You want to read that one?
Yes, so Gabby L said, I had a kiddo hurt her shoulder during slow pitch softball, but she never came to see me. When wrestling season started, her shoulder kept getting worse and worse. Rehab helped, but barely. When we sent her to the doctor, they said she had impingement, scapular dyskinesis, and tendonitis. Man, what a menu of options to treat.
Actually, before you go on really fast, when I was an athletic training student, I kind of had an aha moment when I realized that someone could have more than one injury going on at once.
Yes, that's true. And luckily, all those are fairly related. Anyway, Gabby said might have been one more. But they did no imaging.
What?
I know, right? And even she said kind of blew my mind. If she has all these things going on, shouldn't we check it out? She started to go to a PT clinic, but was doing all the same exercise she was doing with me. It was hard to spend one-on-one with her, so I explained that's why she had to keep going there, so they can catch things she's doing wrong during exercises.
That's really, I think Gabby's at the high school setting, so yeah, that's really tough.
Yes, and highlights the interdisciplinary approach to healthcare. She managed through wrestling season, but couldn't finish it up. You can tell her attitude changed as she kept going. I wanted to do more for her, and she was only a freshman. When softball season started, it was the same thing, so I went out to watch her throw. And it was not how a throw was supposed to look.
Also, a little background, Gabby used to be a softball player.
So I brought my glove out to play catch with her so I could break down the steps. Which, by the way, I'm doing a return to throwing right now, and it's pretty great to go out and play catch. I get to play at some point in my day. It took a couple of days to get it down, but at one point she threw it and just stared at me. She said, "That didn't hurt." I saw the biggest attitude change. I think she forgot what it was like to move her arm and not be in pain. And then COVID hit, and I haven't seen her since.
Hey, at least she made that progression before COVID.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the person that I'm actually playing catch with. That was one of the things. She had shoulder pain for such a long time. And then we were starting a rehab. And I even waited a little bit longer because I knew if we threw and she had pain, she'd get so discouraged. So I was like, we're going to wait a little longer. And then that first time throwing, she didn't feel any impingement, no pain. And she was like, whoa. So it's pretty cool to watch that amazement in their eyes.
That light bulb moment.
Yes.
Okay, I got to take a moment and say how much I just hurt for the athletes who got hurt right before COVID and just had that setback in the time that they probably didn't get to see anyone. Maybe they got to see anyone over video.
Yes, especially the post-op. Post-op.
Yeah, I cannot imagine that life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, who knows how it affected outcomes? Like, were people delayed? Like, I'd be interested to see if there's some kind of study that would be done on that.
There probably will be.
I'm
and
sure.
You'll probably read it.
I will. That is true. I probably will, because it will be interesting to me.
So you want to talk post-op. Nicolette has a post-op.
Okay, let's hear this.
She said that she has a patient who they're rehabbing with an ACL injury. She was on month 7 and way ahead of schedule. Everything was looking perfect.
Nice.
And she's a basketball athlete. Keep that in mind. One day after school, she was running in her front yard and accidentally stepped in a pothole in her knee, hyperextended, and re-tore her ACL.
Oh, no.
That's the worst. She's not even doing anything.
And that is heartbreaking, too.
And such a big injury. The next day, I was the one to evaluate her, and I had some concerns that she had really torn her ACL. I had my supervisor look at her, and he said, "We need to send you to our team physician." And he looked at her and said, "It's probably okay. It's a little lax, but nothing to be worried about." which I strongly disagreed about. One of the main times I disagreed with our team physician.
Ooh, interesting.
And then fast forward 3 months later, she continuously pivot shifted and she went back into surgery this past December.
Oh no, poor thing.
I felt horrible, but she's a great kid and I've gotten the chance to know her personally, and I worked with her 7 months post ACL and now all the way through an additional injury and surgery, and she's still doing rehab. Yeah, that's going to be a really rewarding after that long.
Yes, and you can definitely see the relationship being built and the friendship for sure.
So actually I did, on our Instagram stories, I did ask how many athletic trainers have disagreed with their physician. And I think it was like 99% have disagreed at some point, which I thought was actually very surprising.
I think a lot of it too comes from if they did imaging. Like if you thought they were going to do imaging and then the doctor's like, no, we're not going to do it. And then you're just like, but we need to know. I know that's where a lot of times I'm like, I wish, like, why are we waiting? Like sometimes it's the system where, you know, physicians have their different algorithms that they want to hit, and like, oh, is imaging really necessary at this time? And it's just like, well, let's just find out. Yeah, it can be frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it too is the physicians just don't have that relationship. The physicians have such a diverse and broad knowledge spectrum of all of these injuries, way beyond what we have, which is why I think that we should I am in the boat that we should continue having physician oversight. But
yes, absolutely. I would completely agree with that. It's nice having that, I don't want to say safety net, but it's always nice to have that referral source to know, like, hey, I don't feel comfortable with this. Can you take a look?
Yeah, but honestly, I was very surprised. Usually we have a wide difference of opinion on our polls, but this one was pretty unanimous that at one point there was a time that they have disagreed with their team physician.
And I wouldn't say that's a bad thing either, you know, especially when it's comparing physical exams and you're going off of a clinical diagnosis. You know, a lot of athletic trainers, especially with experience, get really good. And, you know, that's why, like, when you go on to these some athletic trainers going on to advanced professions, they rock the ortho portion because, you know, we do have pretty good clinical skills in that aspect.
I think it's so interesting too, because the time frame that we're seeing the injury and the time frame that the doc or whoever you're referring to is seeing the injury is also, I mean, unless your doc is standing right there when it happens, they're going to not see them right away.
And also, like you said, the relationship.
That relationship is huge.
A patient telling a physician how much pain they're in, when I know the kid's really tough and they're going to probably like downplay it, but then when I see them, they're in like excruciating pain. Like we know, like, okay, something's really not right here.
Yeah, I agree with that. We got another ACL one.
All right.
This one's anonymous.
So I currently have an athlete about 42 weeks post ACL, and we're in the middle of training camps. There's been a lot of mental blocks with regaining confidence in fully returning to play, especially the closer we get to the Olympics. But with each phase of her rehab, we've been able to talk through literally all of her concerns and constantly changing her treatment routine after rehab to get her physically feeling comfortable and ready to continue to work. We obviously have a very hard deadline. We want to get her ready, but we never ever look at the Olympics with fear, but just taking things day by day. I'm probably going to bawl watching her in that first game in Tokyo, but it's something that we both are looking forward to.
That is just so cool. Something to look forward to like that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And like she said, like game planning for the Olympics, that is definitely a 4-year timetable.
Yeah, it is.
There is a lot that goes into that. And if something happens that gives you a setback as you're almost getting to that, you know, that time, if it's like year 3 of that 4-year cycle, it definitely can get pretty nerve-wracking.
Also, I love that she talked about the mental aspect of rehab, because I don't think we've even touched upon that yet.
No, not yet.
And that is huge. We actually got a lot of people talking about the mental aspect of rehab. I don't know why this was the first one in this episode that we talked about, which we'll definitely touch upon later too. But the mental aspect of rehab is something that I'm learning to focus on a lot more earlier.
And it's huge in all injuries, but especially the post-ops, because that is such a traumatic experience that it could be scary for an athlete wanting to return to play and thinking that I might re-injure it again, or what if I do re-injure it again?
And speaking of this, we actually we're going to put in our Facebook group some tips on addressing an athlete who is scared to return to play.
Nice. Yeah, so Alyson S actually brought up that it's not just rewarding for the athlete, but also very rewarding for the AT.
Exactly, to complete, especially long rehabs. She said that she was scared to rehab her first ACL by herself, but it turned out to be one of the best experiences ever. I was scared of messing up or pushing an athlete too hard too soon, which is very common to be nervous about.
Yes, especially for athletic trainers, because a lot of the times your rotations, we don't really do, we're not exposed a lot to post-op rehabilitation, even though we have the opportunity to work on it and, we do have the skill set. It's not something we do commonly amongst our other jobs. It seems to, at least that was my experience through my rotations.
I feel like in the rotations too, you are there for how long was your shortest rotation?
5 weeks.
See, ours were a full semester was our minimum, but for even a full semester, you're not getting a full rehab from start to finish. So the first time that you're getting a long rehab is on your own.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to remember approaching a situation like that is take it back to basics. Just really think about what you learned in your rehab class, in your modalities class. Just take it to the basics of healing and you'll be okay.
Something that really, really helped me was we learned it this way, and I hated it when I learned it, but you got to look at what the patient needs. If the patient has swelling, guess what? You're going to do things to decrease swelling.
Absolutely.
The patient's lacking range of motion, guess what? You're going to do things to increase their range of motion. So honestly, breaking it down that far helped me a ton.
Yes, absolutely. And there's also really good guides out there that should help you kind of game plan where you're at. There are tons of ACL protocols out there that you don't need to exactly follow them, but it gives you an idea of hey, we're at month 2. This is where we should be at. If you're not in there, then you're behind. If you're way above that, hey, you're ahead of schedule. You're doing a great job. Also, your team physician or the surgeon that did the surgery may have a set protocol that they kind of like to go through. It's not a cookie cutter. It's not hey, you have to do it this way. It just gives you a frame. Hey, here's what we're working on at this time frame, and here's where they should be at.
Yeah, and that's also what your mentors are for, because guess what? Your mentors have probably done those things.
Oh, absolutely.
So Alyson also said, the best part was seeing the progress and helping with the mental aspect of rehab. I had to constantly remind this athlete that he was mentally tired, not physically tired throughout his rehab.
Yeah, that's true, because when they're long rehabs, it can just get mentally draining.
That quote right there. I had to constantly remind this athlete that he was mentally tired, not physically tired. I love that because it's hard to distinguish.
Oh, absolutely.
And sometimes it can be the same, honestly.
Yes.
So just being able to talk through that and being able to verbalize that and being able to have the athlete recognize that is huge. I think this last story that we have is actually my favorite.
Yes, and I kind of looked ahead and I saw bone stress injuries, so everyone knows how frustrating and long they can be. I know that life. So Justin N said, working in basic military training for the Air Force, we see a lot of bone stress injuries. I think honestly the most rewarding for me was when I had a girl in tears the second week of training out of 7 weeks come in for a bone stress injury.
He wrote it as BSI, and I just skimmed this real quick. I want to save you the embarrassment that I had thinking that BSI was a military term. I don't know why.
So when you read a lot into stress fractures, BSI comes up a lot.
See, that's just telltale sign I don't read about stress fractures.
So Justin N continued with, I told her the news and she immediately started crying, thinking she was going to get sent home. She told me I have nothing else to do or want to do. The Air Force is all I've ever wanted to do. I told her to trust us and that she would be well taken care of, and reassured her that our job was to get them to graduate on time and become an airman. 5 weeks later, I fully cleared her to return to training, and I got to watch her and her entire flight graduate 3 days later. At the appointment, I asked her, remember when you thought you were going to get sent home? Yeah, I do like sports, but there's so many stories like this when working in a military setting. It's cool to see someone go back to playing a sport, but to see someone return to training so they can graduate on time and start their careers/lives, I can't even begin to tell you how much that means to me. That is so true. I think that's one of the coolest things for me at working at the university setting, when someone like graduates from, their 4-year program, or, moving on to their graduate school, to actually start seeing these young adults go into whatever they were passionate about. It's pretty special.
And that's why I left this one for last, because it is just a perfect wrap up of everything that we just talked about this episode. And it also goes to show how much of your athlete's identity is within what they do, your athlete and or your patient.
You know what? To sum it up, I think we can just say athletic trainers rock.
We do rock.
I like to think we rock. Happy National Athletic Training Month, baby.
So another thing that we're doing this week is on our Instagram story, I put up, when do you know when an athlete is ready to return to play? And we got a lot of great answers. And Maddy actually went into a little bit more depth, because she was talking about how this topic is actually something that her and her PT, who she works with on campus, have talked about so much lately.
Yes, and I mean, I kind of skipped ahead and read a little bit, but it's kind of stuff that we talked about in some of our early pathology episodes about having a return to play system.
So Maddy said, we think clinicians need to get much better at using data to drive this decision, because re-injury rates are so high.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially now.
I almost want to do snaps right now, but I don't think it would come through on the microphones.
He just had 2 of his post-op ACLs tear their other ACL within a month of return, and coaches are constantly badgering us for faster results. So data will help as a tool to show them why that can't happen yet and what we're doing to make it happen. So
yes, and it gives you a nice measurable goal.
Yes.
Like, hey, we need the patient here. Tell the athlete, hey, we need you here. This is what we're waiting on, or one of the things we're waiting on, I should say.
So for the patient side, we should be using more PROs, which are patient-rated outcome scales, and a couple of the ones that she and the PT picked are the ACL RSI scale, Injury Psychological Readiness to Return to Sport scale, FAAM and CAIT for ankle, FASH for hamstring. Also, finding a way to get real objective data for things like range of motion and strength. Use a goniometer. I use a goniometer.
And also, hey, some people don't feel comfortable with the goniometer. I've looked it up. There is literature out there to support this. Your cell phone, they have apps for goniometers, and those are actually valid. They are reliable, and they are valid compared to a standard goniometer. So if you don't feel comfortable, like, oh, I don't like hooking it up to, use your phone, and that can still be a quick way to do it.
She also said, take girth measurements, use the isokinetic machine for ACLs if you have access to one. And lastly, find a way to get baselines for your team. So this includes like doing a basic muscle endurance test for each athlete, and when or if they get injured in the future, you have something to compare to what their normal is.
Absolutely. And this is something that I want to try and implement with the teams that I cover, is using these functional tests like the single leg hop, single leg triple hop. It gives you something to compare what their normal was and to compare different legs. And I definitely use the FAAM. I'm a huge fan of it.
So I was actually really interested in this when she was talking about it, because I only know a few clinicians who use PROs. Actually, that might be a good thing to put up on our Instagram story.
Ooh,
if you use PROs.
That is a good question.
Because I know that you do. I don't know that I ever have. I think I've done some verbal questions that have been on PROs, but I've not actually handed someone something and scored it.
I do have to say I have enjoyed using PROs with my student athletes. It's really nice to have that data and to track their progress. And even if you're not a huge, like, oh, you don't feel comfortable with PROs, and that's okay. Like what Sandra does, you can use it for the information. Like some of these questions have, or some of these inventories have really good questions. Like I know one of them, I can't remember what it's on, but it's like, oh, do you have pain getting in or out of the car?
That's the one that I was going to talk about.
Yeah, so like doing that involves a single leg squat. So then you can use that information like, okay, they have trouble probably single leg squatting. So you can work towards that. So the number is important, and it's good for data and, detecting change and all that. I like using the number.
But of course, data's not everything.
Data's not everything. And I use the information on the sheet too. I like to have the number for the data part, but the information on the sheet is more important to me. And a tip that I've used, and if there's any educators listening, you might cringe because technically it's not valid, But I like to do these digitally. Like I'll go off of a Google, I basically put them in a Google form and I'll email it to the student athlete, and then I can pair those answers onto an Excel sheet that will do the math for me.
Genius.
So now I don't even have to sit and add. I just have the Excel sheet add for me.
Genius.
But yes, I do recognize that theoretically it is not valid through computer. I do know that.
Why is it not valid through a computer?
Because they have not tested that yet. So technically, we don't know.
Yeah, but clinically...
Yes, clinically, I think it'll be fine. And I think later the research will show that you can do it on a Google form and it'll be valid. But I'm just saying right now, currently, I do recognize that you could split hairs and be like, well, that may not be a valid number.
Okay, so some more answers that we did get for when do you know an athlete is ready to return to play? Number one answer, when an athlete can perform the MOI without getting injured.
I think that's important for sure.
Which I think is really funny because when I was a student and we were talking about this, I was thinking, how are you going to do the MOI? And like, what happens if you do get injured?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But also it's
the build up to it.
Yes, and it goes back to the argument that some people will make is everyone views valgus as bad, and it is bad, but sometimes you can't help but go into valgus. So sometimes it's more important to how can you get out of valgus?
Mm-hmm.
That's more important. So that could be the thing. If you can get into that mechanism but recognize it and get out of it, that could be a huge sign.
Yeah. Have you ever watched a hockey goalie?
Oh, big time. Or someone cutting, or like sometimes, sports all planes, so you never know what's going to happen.
Some other people said when the athlete can perform their sport functionally, that's when I know they can return to play. Objectively, we're looking at full and pain-free active range of motion. Some people say after a phased return to training, when they can perform their sport functionally. We got a lot of those. Also, when they can handle game level intensity.
And I like the last one. I think it's very important when they are prepared physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Emotionally is huge.
Absolutely. I think that one really just kind of sums it up. And there are PROs for all those, but also it really just sums up that we're here for the person. It's not just the athlete themselves, but them as a human being, and making sure they are ready to handle the stressors of athletics. And that is a physical stress, a mental stress, and an emotional stress.
Yeah, honestly, the mental aspect of even performance is ginormous. And so to discount that in rehab and return to play is just foolish.
And if you have worked track and field or cross country,
or performing arts,
you know how important the mental aspect of that sport is.
So speaking of this, I know we already said this, but we will be sharing the answers to the best ways to address an athlete who's scared to return to play. We will be sharing those in our Facebook group. And if you're not part of our Facebook group, it's called AT Corner Community. You only have to answer how you heard about our podcast to join, and it's totally free. It's on Facebook. That is also going to double as our question of the week. So if you want to add to that, if you guys have a good way to address an athlete who is scared to return to play, we want to hear your answers in the comments as well. And then if you guys are new, we do every other episode as education or stories. This was a story episode. Next episode is going to be education, and we're bringing on an interview.
You are very excited for this one. This is if there is a passion within athletic training for Sandra, it is this one.
It is. And so we do have a lot of people who are not in California listening to this podcast, and we're from California.
And they're probably thinking, what is the deal with California?
Exactly. We're going to be answering that and more in our next episode, which is a topic that I'm so passionate about.
What'd I tell you? You even heard the voice change. That's how passionate she is about licensure for California ATs.
Exactly. So stay tuned, guys. That will be next week. And you got anything else?
Nope. That was perfect. Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.